Okay, over to you, Hamish. Thank you very much.
Right, I'll just share my screen. Oh, it says host disabled, attendee screen sharing.
That's a good start. Give me 2 seconds.
I've enabled it.
Right, there we go.
Yeah, that's working. Right. So let's close these down. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great. So thank you for inviting me along today. I am, as an introduction to myself, I'm Hamish Martin. I sit in the climate change and zero waste team in the planning service at Fife Council. And I am responsible for developing the council's first local heat and energy efficiency strategy, otherwise known as LHEES, also with support from team and other colleagues as well. So I'll give you a short presentation, give you an overview of what LHEES is and an overview of our strategy and where our next steps are going to be as well. First, to let you know what an LHEES is, it is a strategy to looking at improving energy efficiency of buildings and switching to climate change friendly heating, decarbonised heating. And that's both on individual building level, such as heat pumps or other electric heating sources, or looking on a wider scale, such as district heat networks as well. So this is wording mainly from the national guidance that was provided and is publicly available. I can put a link in the chat to that after if anyone's interested. But effectively, LHEES are at the heart of a place-based, locally led and tailored approach to the heat transition. And they need to underpin an area-based approach to heat and energy efficiency planning and delivery. The first thing I want to point out here is when it comes to energy efficiency, that's just energy efficiency around heating. So it's not looking at like energy efficient light bulbs or lighting, and not really looking at solar, though solar, there's a chance of solar to support heat pumps, but we've been told specifically that the LHEES is only to focus on heat. They all set out a long-term plan, and we decided this also needs a flexible plan for decarbonising heat in buildings, and it needs to cover, in the end, an entire local authority area. And I'll come back to that because the first iteration of LHEES will not cover the entire local authority area. There's a variety of reasons for that. Critically, the LHEES will play a crucial role in helping the council meet the 2045 net zero target, and also ensure Fife is a climate friendly, climate ready and climate just place by 2045. And they are three of the core principles within our Climate Fife strategy. So we need to ensure we align with that. And it obviously is critical for tackling the climate emergency as well. As a brief overview, the LHEES is going to be structured in two parts. The first of which is the strategy document, and a second of which is a delivery plan, a 5-year delivery plan. And the first version of these is to be published by the end of this year, and that's by the Local Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategies Order 2022. And every council across Scotland has to produce this. We effectively, however, need to develop this strategy quickly, flexibly into a high standard. One, to meet the deadline, but also to meet the pace and scale appropriate for the changing climate and the national targets that have been set in the heat and building strategy, which I'll come on to. The delivery plan will also need to identify actions which can be delivered both short term and can be actually scalable and deliverable in that 5-year period. So actually identifying which buildings we can change in that time period, but we also need to look at where further analysis and modelling is needed so we can increase pace and scale over time and improve more buildings at a faster scale. The critical thing for us, and I think agreed by the LHEES steering group, which consists of quite a few of the heads of service in the council, is we'll only be recommending building level actions where we can guarantee there's a high certainty that they will be successful and they'll also have positive impacts. I've got a slide on the challenges you've encountered, and it kind of comes from that is we need to be certain if we're recommending an action, it's not going to cause any damage to a building, and it's not going to raise energy costs or bill prices for anyone either. So we need to be absolutely certain of that. I'll go through this quite quickly, just so you have more time discussing the actual consultation. But there are several key national policies that this has had to align to. Obviously, the target to reach net zero 2045 is the critical overarching one, and also the National Climate Change Plan, which says by 2032, a substantial majority of homes must have achieved a good energy efficiency rating. The three national policies that are critical for this are the heat and building strategy, which sets out a pathway to meet a 2045 net zero from buildings. The Heat Network Scotland Act, which puts duties on local authorities around heat networks, part of which falls under the remit of LHEES, which is identification of potential heat network zones, though the actual designation of heat network zones is a separate piece of work, though it is linked to the work from the LHEES. And also there's the national fuel poverty targets as well, which form a critical part of the LHEES development too. These are some of the key targets we have, and it kind of shows the scale. I won't go through all of them, but effectively shows the scale of what needs to be done. And so these are national targets. So by the one I want to pick out, for example, is by 2030, we need zero emissions heating in equivalent of 50,000 non-domestic buildings across the whole of Scotland. And I think that goes to about 4,000, it's equivalent of 4,000 non-domestic buildings in Fife. And I will caveat that by saying our data on non-domestic buildings is not as good as domestic buildings. We have access to national data sets, but they're not great. So that's definitely a challenge for us to identify where buildings can be improved out with our own stock. One of the other key targets is by 2033, all homes need to be EPC band C. Now, if you're just looking at privately rented homes, that is 69,000 properties in Fife that currently needs to be improved, which is about the numbers in the strategy. And forgive me if I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it's 7,500 homes a year that will need improved to meet that target, which is a significant challenge. And by 2040, all homes at risk of fuel poverty need to be EPC B. But that's so far in advance is how do you define who's at risk of fuel poverty or not? Because if someone's personal situation has changed, they could then go into fuel poverty. So for the purpose of the modelling to develop the strategy, we've taken that target to mean all homes need to be EPC-B, which would be about 8,500 homes need to be changed a year, because there's 136,000 privately owned homes aren't EPC-B. The reason I focus on privately owned homes because social housing has its own targets, which is the Energy Efficiency Standard for Social Housing, or ESH2, which sets a target for social housing to be EPC-B by 2032. And we still have 36,000 homes need to achieve that in Fife. So a significant challenge. And there's other targets as well we'll have to meet too. I believe next year the government are looking at putting this into legislation as well, these targets. At the local level, we've done a good review of all our documents. The two critical ones for us are the plan for Fife, so our local outcome improvement plan, and during the recovery and renewal from COVID, it's set 4 priorities: community wealth and well-being, leading economic recovery, tackling fuel poverty and preventing crisis. That includes fuel poverty and addressing the climate emergency. So they're critical to how we develop the strategy. And then Climate 5 says we need to be climate friendly. So having transformed the economy, infrastructure, land use, and energy system to carbonize how we live. We need to be climate ready. We need to adapt to a changing climate. That's less relevant for LHEES, but we still take into consideration because if we're recommending insulation or cladding for a house, we need to be aware of more extreme temperatures. And also climate just. We need to have a just transition where everyone will benefit from this change and no one's put at a disadvantage. And we've been told in the national guidance LHEES that we need to take cognizance of fuel poverty and having a just transition. So that forms a critical backbone of this strategy. I've also obviously reviewed things such as the local housing strategy and our local development plan as well. So our vision for LHEES is to improve the energy efficiency and decarbonize heat sources of Fife's buildings in a climate friendly, ready and just manner. And we've come up with 8 key priorities. I'll go over these in the next couple of slides. Before I go into them, I will say that the national guidance and recommended methodology gave us 6 considerations. However, these were only focused specifically on building level actions. So there was 3 considerations focusing on energy efficiency and 3 focusing on decarbonized heating, which really wasn't enough and didn't align with Fife's local priorities. So that's why we expanded them to have 8 priorities to also include things such as the jobs and skills gap, behavioral change, tackling the various challenges we've encountered, working with the energy grid to ensure there's enough grid capacity to support this, looking at just transition and putting fuel poverty within its own specific priority because it wasn't really in the national guidance. So we've come up with some outcomes for each. So the first priority is being climate friendly and ready. So this is our overarching priority, effectively focusing on how we're going to meet net zero and how we're going to adapt to a changing climate. And this is an overarching priority that all actions will feed into. The second one is tackling fuel poverty, health, and the just transition. So we need to ensure all communities experience a just transition to net zero, with fuel poor homes becoming more energy efficient and actions only implemented where there will be no detrimental impact on the people within the building. So as I said, in the national guidance, fuel poverty is only linked to energy efficiency, and we thought this wasn't appropriate and fuel poverty needs to stand by itself, because yes, energy efficiency can reduce fuel poverty, but things heat decarbonisation, if we recommend a heat pump and that heat pump runs inefficiently, that could raise energy bills and risk of putting someone into fuel poverty. And also, it's just so that's why we've decided to put it on by itself. In terms of health, that's to do with indoor air quality. We need to ensure that if we're recommending insulation and that insulation is installed correctly, and it's the right type of insulation for that building archetype, so we don't damage the indoor air quality and cause risk of damp or mold. So again, that's why we want to ensure we reference health and just transition to everyone benefits from the strategy. Supporting inclusive economy, jobs and skills. This is about community wealth building, ensuring we involve our communities when we do the delivery of the LHEES. Finance, and it's actually how we're going to fund this. The funding gap is significant. The Scottish Government has said they're going to provide £33 billion for all buildings. That is not enough. It's a good start. And the Scottish Government at a recent conference have said they know it's not enough. The currently 33 billion is about £11,500 per building, which is not enough at all. £11,500 is not enough to improve a school, for example, and it's not even enough to improve an average house up to net zero, at least. There's also a significant skills and jobs gap, which people are aware of, but the focus tends to be on heat pump installers and insulation installers, but there's a whole array of skills and jobs needed for this. We need people who do coordinate retrofits, who know different building archetypes and what is the most appropriate mechanism for each building archetype. We need supporting roles, more welders and scaffolders. We need people who are good at accessing funding for their organizations. We need people who can work on smart technology, which is more of a medium long-term need. We need people who are experienced working on historic buildings. A whole array of skills needed for this, not just heat pump installers and insulation installers. We also, our fourth priority is maximize knowledge and awareness. I will say, already had some feedback from the COM, but it's all stakeholders, and we'll change it to say all stakeholders and Fifers across Fife are aware of how to improve energy efficiency, decarbonise heat and access support programs to facilitate behavioural change. That's going to be the revised wording for that. But effectively, there's a huge need to do a big comms and behavioural change push in this agenda, because by and large, knowledge of how people can effectively improve their homes or businesses in terms of energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation is still relatively low. And there's going to need national coordination on this as well. And Scottish Government have said in Heat and Building Strategy, they are going to develop a toolkit focusing on communication and behavioural change. So we're keen to obviously feed into that and hopefully eventually make use of that. Ensuring certainty of success is about tackling some of the key challenges we've identified from speaking with stakeholders, and how can we try and mitigate these challenges and build that into our modelling to determine which actions are going to be successful in our detailed delivery plan when published next year. The last few priorities are transitioning the energy system. That's effectively working with SPEN to make sure we know where there's grid capacity, and also informing them for their next price control review, which is 2028, where they decide which parts of the grid need significant reinforcement. So we can say, we know we're going to might have a heat network in that area, or we're going to install X number of heat pumps in our social housing stock in this area. We need grid reinforcement. It's also working with SGN as well regarding decarbonising the gas grid, and that is more kind of a watching brief on that, and it'd be more SGN and Scottish Government leading on that. But we need to at least be aware of what conversations are taking place. The last two priorities are regarding energy efficiency of buildings and decarbonising the heat sources, which are effectively the LHEES considerations we were given in the guidance document. And these are very much specifically focused on actually identifying building level actions for our detailed delivery plan, as well as looking at potential heat network zones. I want to come on to some of the challenges. I won't go over all of these. Some of these I touched on already, such as the funding gap and the skills gap, but the top three, uncertainty of measures, energy performance certificates and heat pumps, are some quite limiting challenges. And effectively, we know what the basic measures are to improve the energy efficiency of a property. But how these should combine for different building types is still not really that well understood by across Scotland to allow us to be confident to make suggestions that can roll out across the entirety of Fife. If you get the wrong, if you suggest the wrong combination for a house, this could increase fuel cost, then might risk puts onto fuel poverty, or it could cause things such as damp and mold if you get it wrong. The existing models we have were not designed for the energy transition, so it generates uncertainty on the exact measures we need. So what we're going to do to tackle this, we need to focus on our first iteration of the LHEES on where there are early wins, where we know data is accurate and we are happy with that data, which effectively limits us to our social housing stock at the moment. But we have identified early actions to undertake more detailed analysis of certain aspects of building archetypes to help us find out where there's gaps in the data, how can we build that into modeling, find that data, and then make more decisions over time. There is work being done on building archetypes, like for example by the University of Edinburgh, which hopefully might inform this as well. So we are been attending some meetings with them and hopefully feeding into that as well. EPCs some of them lack accuracy, and unfortunately there's no immediate solution to this. There's currently a national consultation about the EPC reform. I think that closed 2 days ago. We responded to that consultation, making aware of these challenges we identified for the LHEES. So that's a watching brief, unfortunately. Heat pumps is a very big limiting factor. There's a lot of stuff in the news about it. There are a whole range of factors which might change the efficiency of a heat pump. We do not have data for all those factors. We've got a key national domestic data set called Home Analytics. It tells us whether walls are insulated, whether lofts are insulated, floors insulated. Some of that data is modeled, some of it's not. But it doesn't tell us information such as the air tightness of a property, the size of the pipes and radiators, whether the corner joists are insulated. So because of that, we can't be 100% certain for a lot of properties if a heat pump is going to be run efficiently or not, and therefore we can't make that recommendation until we can be 100% certain. That's why we're going to focus on these early wins and probably our social housing to start with, while we look at the modelling and hopefully improve the data sets we have. Also, these slides that we shared so people can look at this in more detail, and this diagram is also in the strategy itself. A whole range of other challenges that came up from various stakeholder meetings. Time to meet targets. Historic traditional buildings is a significant challenge. We have engaged with Historic Environment Scotland on them developing guidance to support this, whether there's going to be actual grid capacity, and how do we encourage owners to improve their buildings as well. So there's a whole range of challenges which have been raised to us, and we're trying to either tackle in this version of the strategy, or we'll do it as specific projects in our detailed delivery plan. Or maybe it might be at the specific project level as well, just like managing disruption. In terms of the delivery plan, now I appreciate this is not a full delivery plan. The decision was made to publish a high-level delivery plan in this instance due to the timescale and deadline, and we will produce a detailed delivery plan with timescales, KPIs, delivery partners in 2024. The reason for this was we felt there wasn't enough time to use a delivery plan that people would be satisfied with, to get the buy-in for it, and ensure we were recommending actions which have a high certainty of success. But these are the broad headings that the detailed delivery plan will be published under. And we'll go out. I've already had a chat with Craig about how we maybe can do a workshop in early 2024 on the detailed delivery plan as well with yourselves. But effectively, we're going to have 7 categories. So our building level actions, which will consist of projects that are already planned by stakeholders, so like what NHS are already doing, and also new actions we can identify. We'll have actions focusing on identifying new heat networks, expanding our existing district heat networks, so in like Dunfermline and Glenrothes, and look at different heat network delivery model options too. We'll have actions focused around the energy system and looking at decarbonising the grid and identify where there's existing capacity or where that capacity needs reinforced. A whole range of actions working with the business team and the council on trying to close the skills and jobs gap. A whole range of action will be on funding as well, and engaging government to try and get more funding. A lot of actions on raising awareness of LHEES and also of where support is to improve your homes and businesses and how that can be done. And then also, how do we fill in the data gaps? So what is the change methodology we need to do? What other data do we need to collect? What additional modeling is needed? And that's needed because the national methodology we were given, we felt was not satisfactory enough to meet the needs of Fife. So we had to adapt it. And we'll continue to do that over the as early actions. Just in terms of next steps, we are doing an optioneering exercise. And Craig, I realized the slides I sent you didn't have this slide, and I added it just before I got on the call, so I'll share this with you. We're going to go through an optioneering exercise. And this will be the process to identify building level actions for our detailed delivery plan. Effectively, we will come up with scenarios such as what private houses could reach EPC-B with energy efficiency measures and decarbonized heat sources. We've got a national data set and model which can model that for us. And then we filter the buildings to identify these properties. We would show this spatially on mapping software, and we pull out stats for at the grid level, so maybe 100 meter grid, which then might allow us to identify areas and prioritize areas which might have, for example, the highest positive fuel poverty change or have the lowest estimated cost of retrofit. So we can know areas to prioritize for short-term wins, for early wins, sorry. We then take that down to a building level and look at the data building by building to identify which buildings to prioritize. And then we need to engage with stakeholders. So for example, our housing colleagues say, this is what our data tells us. Are you happy to improve these buildings in the next 5 years? And we'd show various different scenarios. So like, this is scenario A where we're looking at heat pumps, this scenario B, which is looking at insulation, and scenario C, we're looking at something else. And we can weigh it up against their various priorities using various indicators and kind of tell that story. It's still very much a work in process, this, and we're still trying to find the right approach for us because it's going beyond the national methodology. And it's kind of ourselves and Perth and Kinross are doing something similar. So, but we feel it's needed because the national methodology doesn't take account of the challenges or other limiting factors such as grid capacity and etc. So this will be what will inform our detailed delivery plan once we perfect it. And this just, thanks very much. And just a reminder that there's a web page for LHEES. It also accompanied by a web map, which shows some baseline data for domestic and undomestic buildings at the data zone level. It shows our strategic zones, which are our initial zones, which help us prioritize areas maybe to focus on. To be honest, they're quite high level, and it'll be when we identify these smaller delivery areas where we actually get into the prioritization. Unfortunately, at the moment, we can't make all that public because one data sets we have is deemed as personal, and we can't show stuff at building level publicly. And it also shows our potential heat network zones as well, and what's called anchor loads, which are buildings of a high heat demand, which can support a heat network. But thank you very much for your time. Hopefully I didn't overrun too much. And yes, looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you. Is that stop sharing?
Brilliant. Yep. Yep. Thank you, Hamish, for that. Thank you for squeezing it into a little time frame. Absolutely perfect. Spot on. Thank you.
Thank you.